Hey friends, how's it going? Today, we're gonna do CV shafts on a Cadillac CTS.
To make this a little bit easier to remove the CV shafts and stuff, I am gonna take the wheels off. So I'm gonna start there, pull these off so I can get in this way, back there, to get those axles unbolted. I'll link some of the tools I use down below. Definitely things like an impact wrench, some impact sockets make this job a lot easier. This just opens up a lot more room out here. I can get back in there to get like the CV shaft bolts and stuff from out here. I'm gonna go ahead and disassemble the wheel hub assembly here. I'm gonna disconnect the control arm bolts, take off this brake caliper, the lower control arm bolts I'm gonna take out. So that way I can just pull this wheel hub assembly off so I can get the CV shaft out. On this vehicle here, the axle nut has these little tabs that are pried down to hold it onto the shaft. So I've got to just pry those up. I'm gonna use the big socket here to pull this nut off and then go ahead and just disassemble everything. We're going to remove the caliper bracket bolts on the back of this. There's one on the top, one down kind of on the bottom right down there. We're going to remove those to pull off this whole brake caliper as one assembly instead of pulling the caliper off and then the back bracket separately. We're just going to pull it off together. And the bottom bracket nut right here, this is a 13 millimeter. That top one was an 18. So you have to just kind of be aware of that. There's those caliper bracket bolts right there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get a pry bar and just pry this off and just pull this whole assembly off for me. And then once we get this guy pulled off and out of the way, what we're gonna do, so we're going to use a caliper hanger tool. If you don't have one of these, definitely invest in them so that way you're not putting pressure on those brake lines. You can hang these up out of the way in a convenient location. Next couple of bolts we're going to remove, there's a shock bolt back here we're going to remove, and then there's this sway bar link bolt here that we've got to remove on this side still. Both of these are a 21 millimeter, so I'm going to use my impact socket set on those and then use a wrench if I need to on the back side of that shock strut bolt there to get that one off. When doing this, a couple of different things to think about. I've got the suspension just kind of hanging in the air right here. I'm gonna probably put my jack under here, so that way if there's any pressure on the spring, which there probably is up here, it doesn't launch this thing down when I get everything unbolted. So I'm just gonna use my jack, put it up here to kind of keep the tension on it a little bit. Now I've got that shock bolt out of there. Here's the bolt is. I'm gonna kind of just keep these all laid up in the way I'm disassembling this so I remember. So now that shock's loose on there and time to finish pulling out the sway bar link one as well as this control arm bolt on the very bottom here. Tip or trick I want to show you on this, take some wheel nuts, bolt them onto the actual studs here, then use yourself a pry bar to pry this, hold this in place so you can loosen this nut to take that nut off because that thing's torqued on there tight. Just a little tip for you. Another option you have if you have an impact gun to take this off, you can do that. Never use one of these to reinstall one though, but to take it off you can use this to loosen it up. The bottom nut here on this control arm assembly also is a 21 millimeter. You might need to use a wrench on the front to hold this nut in place. We'll see what happens here. And again, just laying those bolts and nuts out in order that I remove them, so when I reassemble, I know where everything went. Now, the only thing we really have left on this side is this last control arm bolt right here, and then this whole assembly here should come off. I'll probably have to pull the brake rotor off to make this a little bit easier as well, I suppose. If you have the factory rotors and stuff, you might have this little Torx bit here that kind of holds it in place. In case you're wondering, this is a T30 Torx bit to remove that little screw right there. It might be a pain in the butt, so just be careful with that one, otherwise you'll have to drill it out, which I've done in other videos. This one literally coming out just the way it's supposed to, which never happens on these videos, so the automotive repair gods are smiling down upon us today, guys. Sometimes these things need a little love. Use a rubber mallet. Don't use a steel hammer or anything super crazy on these, or you could mess up your entire brake rotor. Oh yeah. And I still do have the ball joint attached right here, so we'll have to pull this guy off. Hopefully it'll separate easy, otherwise I've got a ball joint separator tool I can use to get that apart too. But we'll just hope that comes out easy and comes all apart. But I've got the wheel hub assembly pulled off, so that way the CV shaft's hanging loose. In order to do this, we've got to remove the CV shaft, so now we can get up in there. And in order to do this, honestly, I'm gonna push down on this lower arm here, and you can see that spring drops down. I'm gonna pull it out right there. And again, just giving us some more room here. So there's that coil spring. Now we can set that off to the side with everything else. Small loop goes at the top. Just keep that in mind. Now you can see we can actually get up in here quite easily. And the CV shaft bolts directly back there to that rear end. You can see there's 5 or 6 bolts that hold that on. They're Torx bolts. We can get in this way now and get those a lot easier. Easiest way to get to these CV shaft bolts, I'm using an impact wrench with a couple extensions. Just going up in here and putting it actually in the bolt. I've already got these kind of loosened, but that allows you to get these out without having to like crawl under the car. So that's what I'm doing. Again, impact wrench, a couple kind of long extensions, and then it's 5/16 Allen Torx that I'm using on this. Now we got this whole thing unbolted. It's just gonna pull right out, just like that. And there is our CV shaft, or drive shaft, on this side. So now this side's done.
And if you wanted to do the same thing on the driver's side, you'd go to the driver's side and do this exact same procedure over there.
If you haven't done so already, be sure to go down, hit that subscribe button for me. Trying to get to 10,000 subscribers this year. I appreciate it a ton if you could help me out with that. So now we're gonna basically assemble everything the opposite of these brand new GM replacement parts. They've already got the thread sealing on these. So I'll be able to just put these on my new CV axle and get it bolted in there. This axle does come with like a zip tie in there. You got to pull that out before we put that in here. And again, I had pulled that spring out to make this job a lot easier to do. If you're going to do this, pull the spring out. It's not too hard. You just disconnect that control arm like I showed you earlier, push down on that little mount, and then the spring pops right out. It gives you much easier access to get there to mount this up. The CV shaft also comes with a new bolt for the hub. Make sure you replace that. Don't reuse your old ones. Definitely recommended to replace those if you're doing this. So if you order a CV shaft that didn't come with one, just buy one from the auto parts store or order one online. Just in case you need the part number from GM for these, here's that part number on this bag right here. Again, I'll link some of this stuff down below so that way it's a little easier for you guys to find it and order it if you need to. Another thing to note, these kits do come with the collar as well. So that's just another nice little thing about these kits. So there's the bolts and collars in. Now we're just gonna slide it up in there, get them started on the differential right there, and then get them torqued into place. Since I'm doing this by myself, I'm gonna use this jack stand to kind of hold the joint out here on the outside so I can get under there and start the bolts onto the differential, and then I'll come back out to tighten them here. Something else I'm trying to make sure is that as I'm threading these in, that I'm getting it to be kind of even with the way that it is going to thread in, so that way I don't have like a big gap at the top and I'm threading in the bottom. So I'm kind of going around and doing these one at a time, and then we're going to torque these guys in there super tight, and then hopefully that blue thread lock will help hold them in place as well. Got the CV shaft bolted up to the differential. Now we can come to the outside and start putting back the control arm and the hub assembly and all that stuff. We're getting it all put back together. Don't forget to put the spring in if you pulled the spring out. Just getting all the bolts lined up. We'll be getting ready to torque everything down in a second. Put that brake caliper on. The one thing to point out, the upper ball joint can be a little tricky. What you've got to do is use 2 different wrenches. There's like a hex shaped bottom of the ball joint that sticks out. You got to put a small wrench on there and then use a wrench on top to actually tighten the ball joint down. Another little tool that I'm using is this brake piston compressor. Since I had the brake caliper off, piston had kind of pushed out, so that pushed the piston out. So now I've just used this little tool right here to compress it in. Again, I'll link some of these tools down below in case you need them for any of the times you work on your vehicles. Okay, I've got to just put this sensor in this side, but this is all bolted up, ready to go. And the other side is too. We've got everything reassembled over here. Everything's torqued down, hooked up over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the wheels, get those put on.
And there it is, CV shafts all done. Hopefully you're able to follow along and get yours done. And until next time.